Yi Futian paid a visit to the Mo clan, after he was done paying a visit to the Situ clan. Since it was the Mo clan that had extended the invitation, he did not see the need to hold back. Yi Futian paid a visit to the Mo clan, after he was done paying a visit to the Situ clan. Since it was the Mo clan that had extended the invitation, he did not see the need to hold back. It did not matter what the Mo clan thought of the proposal. It would have been great if they were able to agree to it. Even if they were to not agree to the proposal, there was no way the Mo clan would have leaked the news anyway. Before the Bliss Palace was destroyed, the top-notch forces in Chenya City would have only dared to stay neutral. While it was said that the mighty dragon was no match for the native serpent, that still depended on the dragon. If the other imperial realms were to take a city by force, they could have done so quickly. However, some imperial realms were reluctant to do so, as not only was the trip difficult to make, but taking down a city meant that they would have had to leave a powerful force behind to manage the taken city. With conflict being a common sight in the Crimson Dragon realm, they might have run into all sorts of problems. As such, not all Renhuangs would have been willing to carve out a piece of the land for themselves in the Crimson Dragon realm. This time, however, they could have taken the opportunity to do so. The city lord's office organized a banquet several days later, inviting all major forces throughout the city to participate. It was said to be thrown to celebrate Yu Sheng and the others, as well as to welcome Yi Futian and his party officially. Everyone in Chenya City, however, was able to tell that the young city lord wanted to get close to Yi Futian's party. But then again, their talents were so extraordinary that it was indeed worth the effort. Guests gathered at the city lord's office that day. Somewhat inferior forces showed up early and waited at the place where the banquet was held. A group of people was received into the city lord's office, and many went up to cup their hands in greeting. "Greetings, Senior Situ. You're all being too kind." Situ Zhong cupped his hands and returned the gesture. Many were surprised that even the clan leader of the Situ clan, Situ Zhong, showed up personally. It seemed that he held the banquet in very high regard. However, one who was able to destroy the Bliss Palace was indeed worth being taken seriously by the top-notch forces in Chenya City. If Yi Futian and his people were to stay in Chenya City for prolonged periods, they would have become legends in the city. "Senior Situ." Shen Jun brought his people and walked up to him, bowing politely to him. He said, "I did not expect that you would show, Senior. I would have greeted you outside if I knew you were coming." "No need for formalities, young city lord. It's quite an event in Chenya City, and so I just thought to come and sit around for a bit." Situ Zhong smiled and replied. The people in the Situ clan all smiled, and there was nothing out of place with them. "Situ Yen, why didn't you notify me that the elder was coming?" Shen Jun smiled and asked Situ Yen. Situ Yen smiled and said nothing. Shen Jun then said, "Please, Senior, have a seat." "Great." Situ Zhong nodded and took a seat at one of the privileged seats. Many who showed up and greeted everyone, making the scene very lively. The mighty ones from the Mo clan showed up shortly after. What was even more surprising was that the clan leader of the Mo clan was there as well. Many noted that all the big shots in Chenya City seemed to have all made it to the banquet. "Sir Yi is here." A voice was heard at that moment, and many turned to look in that direction. It was none other than Yi Futian and his group. They all walked forward, and people from many forces in Chenya City rose. Some smiled and said, "Your name has been all over the place, Sir Yi, and you look more extraordinary than you're said to be." Yi Futian nodded faintly with a plain expression. Many forces had brought their women with them to the banquet, and they were all very beautiful, exceptional members of the younger generations. Their eyes sparkled when they saw Yi Futian, thinking how handsome that legend known all over the city was. That full head of silver hair of his looked very charismatic, and they all thought he must have had quite a colorful past. However, Yi Futian walked straight ahead without taking one look at them. After seeing what Xiaqing Yuan and the glass saint looked like, all of them thought that they were ridiculous for having thought anything in the first place. Yi Futian naturally did not know what was going on in their heads. He walked forward and Shen Jun rose as well. He said with a smile, "You're all that is left now. Please take a seat, Brother Yi." However, Shenjun did not see any smile on Yi Futian's face. Instead, he looked different from before. His silver hair billowed, and his white robe looked flawless. His chiseled face looked cold, and those deep eyes of his seemed to be able to see through people. Shenjun, Yi Futian went up and halted his steps. The others stood behind him, and they all looked solemn. The atmosphere changed within an instant. The smiles on the faces of everyone present rescinded. It was apparent that they all sensed something different was going on. Yi Futian called Shenjun by his name. Furthermore, his eyes were aloof and cold, seeming condescending even. At that moment, Yi Futian emanated the might of a saint and looked somewhat supreme. Situ Yan's eyes sparkled. Yi Futian's bearing seemed to have changed within that instant. He appeared utterly different. What is the meaning of this, Brother Yi? Shenjun had noticed Yi Futian's changes as well. He seemed to sense a looming danger ahead. He came to hold Yi Futian in high regard at the moment. He had been treating him with respect in hopes of reconciling the conflict between him and Yi Futian. While both parties had been amicable and did not turn on each other, he knew what he did to Yi Futian before, and Yi Futian harbored resentment over it. As such, he did his best to reconcile and mend the relations between the two of them. He no longer had any thoughts of using him. However, it seemed to be too late. He had invited various forces in Qianya City and thrown a banquet to welcome Yi Futian. But Yi Futian did not seem to be of an attitude befitting that of a guest. He felt that Yi Futian was there to interrogate him instead. We knew each other somewhere out there, and you invited us to Qianya City. You then set up a meeting between Bai Zhe and us, then followed up with testing Yu Sheng and the others, baiting us into participating in the battle of the sleeping dragon. If Yu Sheng was of inferior powers, he might have ended up killed by Yin Tong and the others. Was that what you meant by the battle being harmless? Yi Futian looked at Shenjun and said. Shenjun frowned after hearing that Yi Futian questioned him in front of everyone. Yi Futian was indeed there to hold him responsible. Participation in the battle of the sleeping dragon was entirely voluntary. I don't remember forcing any of you to participate. Shenjun then said coldly. I have gone all the way to welcome you, Brother Yi. So what do you mean by this? If we lost in the battle of the sleeping dragon, it would have been our people who would have died. If we won, you'd be the one to get awarded, no? Yi Futian asked. Since when have we become your subordinates, Shenjun? How about we let the past be the past, Brother Yi? We'll drink and let it all slide. You're free to name whatever compensation you want. If you'd like the rewards from the battle of the sleeping dragon, you're free to have them. We'll end things at that, how about it? Shenjun said with a glum face, apparently trying to make compromises. The lord of a city was lower than that of a Runhuang force, meaning that he was at a disadvantage. However, he did not know how much power Yi Futian was capable of mobilizing. I want Qianya City. Are you going to give the city to me? Yi Futian asked. Shenjun's expression turned completely cold. He glared at Yi Futian and said, Don't go too far, Brother Yi. You might be highly valued by the Runhuang of Emperor Xiao's realm, but this is still the Crimson Dragon realm. Both men glared at each other for a while. A stifling atmosphere washed all over the place in an instant before the banquet had even started. Two saintly auras clashed, and all who were present at the banquet shuddered. Some knew what was going on, and those who did not know dared not get in the middle haphazardly. The situation was tense enough for people to know it was to better wait and see, instead of doing anything immediately. Yi Futian took one step out, and it was all that was needed to bring a stormy aura of the saint sweeping all over the place. A formless gale swept the entire banquet. Shenjun's expression was gloomy and dark, finding it baffling that Yi Futian dared to make a move against him in the city lord's office. What is his backing for doing all this? He thought. There were few others behind Shenjun who stepped forward, with one of them emanating a very powerful aura. Yaya stepped from behind Yi Futian as well. A formless gust of sword aura washed all over the space. The cups in the banquet shattered within an instant. The tables and chairs were then destroyed bit by bit. Mighty ones from all forces unleashed powerful saintly might for protection. They all retreated. That terrifying storm swept all over the place, and every miscellaneous item crumbled instantly. Powerful auras burst within the city lord's office and swept all over the place. They looked up at the sky and felt many powerful auras descending from above all of a sudden. They all flashed, intending to leave the banquet. The figures that appeared high in the air descended, sealing the place, and landed on the buildings at the city lord's office. All of them were surprisingly saints. Shen Jun's expression turned especially gloomy. Yi Futian had brought people of Emperor Xia's realm here? The figures that appeared turned their eyes and looked at the place where the banquet was held. They all bowed in the direction where Xia Qingyuan was and said, "Greetings, Princess." Princess, the eyes of many froze, and Shen Jun felt a shudder running all over him. His face seemed rather ashen. How could this possibly be? He thought. There is a princess from Emperor Xia's realm in Yi Futian's group? He turned around and saw the figures behind Yi Futian. He eventually turned to Xia Qingyuan. He recalled the conversation between Xia Qingyuan and Kong Xian at that very instant. There was only one line to be had, and he did not think too much about it as a result. Xia Qingyuan had just tagged along with Yi Futian after all. He had only discovered that he made a grave mistake at that moment. Women who were in love would not have cared about their status. They would have been willing to stand by the sides of their beloved as secondary characters, even if the woman in question was a high and mighty daughter of a Renhuang. If he were to know that the princess of Emperor Xia's realm was in their midst, he might have apologized right away instead of trying to mend their relations through drinking at a banquet. It was apparent that Yi Futian never intended to give him any chance. He made a move right after showing up. Xia Qingyuan turned her eyes to the air and nodded lightly, which seemed to have confirmed the speculations of Shen Jun and the others. She is indeed a princess of Emperor Xia's realm, they thought. What does it mean for a daughter of Renhuang willingly standing behind a young cultivator in Emperor Xia's realm anyway? If they were to be told that Xia Qingyuan had no thoughts about Yi Futian, none of them would have believed that. Shen Jun is done for this time. A thought crossed in the minds of many present. It was no surprise why that group of people was so extraordinary and dared to wipe out the palace lord of the Bliss Palace without considering the consequences. They had backing from someone even more powerful. Yi Futian dared to attack Bliss Palace, not only because of Yaya. Yi Futian dared to attack Bliss Palace, not only because of Yaya. After all, for him to destroy the Bliss Palace, other things needed to be considered. It seemed the City Lord office requested an explanation. Xia Qingyuan came to the Crimson Dragon realm from Emperor Xia's realm to conduct trials. It was impossible that she would not have strong cultivators accompany her. What was more this time, the request from Yi Futian for Xia Qingyuan's help had a purpose in itself. Everyone help me take them down. The expression on Shen Jun's face changed again and again. His eyes turned to the cultivators at the banquet. Many cultivators had descended upon the city lord's office, and Yi Futian was going to make a move against their city lord's office at Qinya City. As Yi Futian said before, what if I wanted to take Qinya City? Well, this matter could not have a satisfying ending. But if Yi Futian and Xia Qingyuan were both taken, then there was still a chance to turn the tides. No one paid any attention to Shen Jun. Several top principalities had already been talked to by Yi Futian, so they were all aware and remained calm and collected, because they had previously anticipated the situation at the moment. In the cities of Crimson Dragon Realm, changeovers of ownership were commonplace. Plundering and infightings with one another continuously, and eruptions of occasional battles of various sizes were not unheard of. Under such circumstances, for the forces in the city to be loyal to the city lord's office was, obviously, an impossibility. Right now, the opponent of the city lord's office of Qinya City was the people from Renhuang's realm. In the Crimson Dragon Realm, many from the Renhuang realm came here to expand their power, and those were relatively strong individuals. Even on other matters, where Renhuang was not allowed to interfere with the goings-on in the Crimson Dragon Realm, the underlings of Renhuang were more than capable of taking over a city. Under this circumstance, the most they could do was to remain neutral. So how could they help the city lord's office? With the destruction of Bliss Palace fresh in their memory, who would want a repeat of it? Young city lord, today's matter was caused by many injustices, Situzhong said with a clear voice. The people of Sita clan stood up, and suddenly seemed to surround Xinjun and others with a blooming pressure. The people of Qianya City looked at him. This old guy had picked a side. Xinjun looked pale. In this space, his people now were at an absolute disadvantage. The Situ clan had committed treason by supporting Yi Futian. Yi Futian walked toward Xinjun, and he said in a cold voice, "Xinjun, since you invited me to Qianya City, I won't hold back." Bang! Xinjun stepped out. His body soared into the sky, and the might of the Saint Plane was fully released. In an instant, flames filled the sky and shrouded the firmament. Yi Futian looked up slightly. He took a similar step, turning into lightning that shuttled through the void, and headed straight to Xinjun. Xinjun stood above the void. His hands were forming a seal, as he bathed in a dazzling luster of flame. Many immense flaming dragons roared angrily, and rushed out with incredible speed toward Yi Futian. With the divine brilliance upon his body, Yi Futian seemed to be covered with a layer of sacred starry armor, and the flames swallowed him up but did not burn him. The immense body of the fire dragon impacted him, and a powerful roaring sound came out. That brilliant golden body penetrated that of the dragon, like a golden streamer, sacred but bright, aiming directly toward Xinjun roar. Another angry roar trembled between heaven and the earth, and an extremely fierce nine-headed crimson flame dragon appeared behind Xinjun. The sacred light of fire surrounded it. The nine-headed dragon moved at the same time, wanting to swallow Yi Futian in one gulp. Yi Futian did not stop at all. His spinning body turned into real lightning, and the golden lightning sliced through the void and rushed into the mouth of the dragon. Suddenly, a dazzling radiance erupted above the dragon's body, and the shrill sound of gurgling was heard. The immense body of the dragon exploded and shattered, and a figure emerged from the endless sword might. Its body shot straight toward Xinjun. Xinjun's face was pale. He had been extremely confident in his offense, but it was directly crushed and broken. The magnificent streamer magnified in the pupil. He saw Yi Futian raise his arms. Huangting fist will burst forth, breaking through the void. It penetrated Xinjun's last defense until it blasted upon his chest. Clack! The sound of the bones exploding was so clear that everyone below could hear it, and the people from the city lord's office wanted to come to his aid. However, Yaya Situzhong and the others were standing there, so who could intervene? Xinjun spat out a mouthful of bright red blood, and his body flew backward. Yi Futian took a step forward, and his arm, flowing with pure brilliance, struck out again. For a moment, the aurora of the fists pierced through the void and kept blasting on Xinjun's body. It was like rays of golden light pierced through his chest to his back. Xinjun's body, like rootless duckweed, was blasted weakly, flying mindlessly in the air. Yi Futian slapped a large palm print down until he was blasted on a building. The building collapsed and shattered, and Xinjun's body fell right into the ruins. There was no strength, and his hands lay weakly there. Yi Futian's figure drifted down to the ground. He stood in front of Xinjun and looked down at the figure that lay on the ground. Xinjun coughed up blood, but even the coughs sounded weak, and his eyes were still open, watching the figure that was standing in front of him and looking down at him. Those eyes, at that moment, were so proud yet scornful of his existence. Xinjun realized that he had been using Yi Futian and treated him like a clown. But in fact, he was the clown in the eyes of the others. From the start, Yi Futian had never really cared about his existence. Everything that he had done was more like a joke. His long silver hair blowing in the wind. And Yi Futian didn't say a word to him, but looked straight ahead. An extremely forceful breath was blooming. At the moment when the breath was released, the entire city lord's office became extremely oppressed. It was unclear when Yaya had come in front of Yi Futian. It seemed the pressure of the might was giving her considerable tension, and her pair of sharp eyes stared steadily ahead. There was a sensation of extreme heat. A middle-aged man clad in a robe decorated with flames stood there quietly. His pupils seemed to be burning with fire. When he looked up into the void, the vast sky suddenly turned fiery red, and the sky was burning. Within the circumference of several hundred miles from the city lord's office, everyone felt hot and uncomfortable. When they looked up at the sky that was burning red, they were all shocked. What was happening at the city lord's office? This seemed to be the breath of the city lord. However, the city lord of Qinya City was said to be cultivating alone. The affairs of Qinya City were left to the young city lord, and he had not been seen for a long time. And today seemed to be the day that the young city lord hosted a dinner banquet in honor of Yi Futian. But for some reason, it seemed like a terrifying battle had blown up. Crimson Dragon City, the main city of Crimson Dragon Realm, was under the direct command of the Crimson Dragon Emperor. The surrounding cities were filled with top personalities who not only had to compete with top cultivators from other major interfaces, but sometimes their opponents were from all walks of life directly under the command of the emperors of other realms. Under such circumstances, the people in charge of the main cities around Crimson Dragon City today were truly from the existence of top Saint Plain. They were either born of the cultivators of the Crimson Dragon Realm, or originated from travelers from all parts of the Crimson Dragon Realm, who eventually settled here, or in other principalities of emperors. The city lords of every city in this central area belonged to Nirvana Plain. If these lords were placed within each Renhuang's realm of the Crimson Dragon Realm, they were all giants who alone could deter a major force. Anyone who was not the best of the best had already been eliminated in the fiercely competitive environment of Crimson Dragon Realm, and had no qualification to control a city at all. Shen Tianzhan, city lord of Qinya City, likewise, was also such a fearsome presence. He immersed himself in cultivation, and possessed tremendous strength. If he intervened, it must have been that he had encountered a powerful opponent. It was highly likely that someone would come to seize the city. At this moment in the city lord's office, Shen Tianzhan looked up at the sky. He stood there casually like a god, with his body as the center, and a burst of hot glow erupted. However, as strong as Shen Tianzhan was, his look toward the sky seemed extremely grave. He said, "If my son offended anyone, I am responsible for the lack of discipline, and I apologize on his behalf." In the distance, Yi Futian's body floated in the air, looking at that proud figure. The existence of Nirvana Plain was astounding. He looked up into the void, and saw a figure drift down from above. The man was dressed in a white cloak. He appeared very mysterious. He held a scepter in his hand, and his aura wasn't too great. But by merely standing there, he seemed to pose a great threat to the city lord of Qinya City. The figure in white in the void looked at Xiaqing Yuan and Yi Futian. He asked, "Princess, what shall we do?" Xiaqing Yuan came to Yi Futian's side in a flash. She whispered, "You decide." Yi Futian looked at the front. He knew who came this time. In the land of 9 states, the first person in the legendary saint ranking list, the Great Shaman. In his hand was the #1 divine implement, Scepter of Control. Many years ago, the Great Shaman followed Emperor Xia in cultivation, and remained at the side of Emperor Xia. He became Emperor Xiao's confidant. This trip, he was tasked to guard the safety of Xiaqing Yuan. The strength of the Great Shaman was unquestionable. The land of 9 states had finally produced a figure of great acclaim. Yi Futian looked to Shen Tianzhan and said, "Shen Jun invited us to Qinya City, and used us without regard for our lives. That being the case, now Qinya City is changing hands. If you want to leave, we will not detain you, but Shen Jun stays. If you stay, you can help us manage Qinya City. In the future, when the time is right, we will grant you another city in return." Either choice, no matter which, Shen Jun would not be released. Otherwise, the departure of Qinya City Lord, Shen Tianzhan, would be a hidden concern. Shen Tianzhan looked toward Yi Futian, and his eyes seemed to be burning with terrible flames. At first glance, Yi Futian felt his eyes tingle. It was as if the sensation of flames had rushed directly into his pupils. But in the next moment, Shen Tianzhan looked away and turned his attention to the Great Shaman once more, saying, "Shen Tianzhan of Qinya City, please enlighten me." The Great Shaman bowed his head. His eyes landed on Shen Tianzhan, and he introduced himself, the Great Shaman of Emperor Xiao's realm. The Great Shaman bowed his head. His eyes landed on Shen Tianzhan, and he introduced himself, the Great Shaman of Emperor Xiao's realm. At the moment when the voices of the two men faded, a fiery hot sensation shrouded the infinite space, and both the sky and the earth turned red. Futian lowered his head and glanced down. The earth seemed to be roasting, and there was a vague and surreal feel to it. Just how strong was the Saint of Nirvana plane? Perhaps a single thought was enough to destroy a city. Boom! Flames were ignited in the sky and the earth, and all the cultivators released their power to shield their bodies against that invisible force. Shen Tianzhan's body was bathed in a radiant sacred fire. In an instant his body skyrocketed. Above the sky, an immense and boundless flaming dragon opened its enormous mouth. It emerged from the burning red sky and moved toward the great shaman. Countless people on the ground looked up at the sky, their hearts trembling violently. They felt tiny in front of the dragon. It was as if a breath from the dragon could burn them to nothing. The great shaman stood there quietly, and his body did not sway. Above his cloaked body countless bright, golden lights lit up, like countless golden threads, moving toward his body at high speed. In an instant those endless golden threads, like a divine net of space, winding upwards, covered the sky and the sun, winding on the body of the dragon. The sacred flaming dragon continued to dive down, but the divine net of space expanded, and the golden threads entangled it within. Great shaman raised the scepter, and the endless lines of space cut through the void and the dragon's body, cutting it into countless pieces. For a moment, the immense sacred dragon turned into endless fire and rained down. Boom! The ground exploded and shattered madly, and infinite flames shot from above the sky, condensing together, and fierce roaring sounds were heard. Shen Tianzhan stood proudly above the sky. Both of his hands were forming a seal, and many flaming gods of war, that stood a few thousand meters tall, appeared in the sky, surrounding the great shaman. The palms of Shen Tianzhan, with the formed seal, blasted out. Suddenly, all the flaming gods of war accompanied his movement and blasted shocking flaming palm prints, covering the sky and destroying the void. The great shaman stood in the center of these flaming gods of war, appearing extremely insignificant, like a gnat. At this moment, above the great shaman, a more brilliant light bloomed forth. A golden lotus appeared under his feet, and the lotus petals released an endless glow. The golden lotus rotated and expanded continuously. The lotus petals opened and closed, and instantly wrapped his body in it, turning it into a lotus light screen, shrouded him within. Bang, bang, bang. The godlike flaming palm prints blasted attacks, and the lotus petals sunk inward as if to melt in destruction. But the glow was shining, and the giant golden lotus continued rotating. The petals perished and were reborn with even more brilliant light. They bloomed toward heaven and the earth. Giant lotus appeared one after another, continually expanding, and an unparalleled golden glow was emitted at the same time. The space was drowning in dazzling light, and the bodies of the flame gods of war were penetrated, torn, and shattered. The void in which the great shaman was located had been completely transformed into a world of fire, and those flames seemed to be slightly surreal, burning up the sky. Countless people on the ground looked up at the sky. If they had stood there, they would probably be turned into nothingness. The sun's rays sprinkled down and reflected on that flame space, as if interspersed with each other. The sun's rays also turned into part of fire, so that the way merged with the heaven, and the fire of the great path now one with the sun. Boom! The world of flames suddenly erupted, and the space in which the great shaman was started burning. It turned into a true solar furnace, smelting all existence. However, the great shaman still stood there, wearing a cape, and his eyes were as calm as they were before. He raised his foot and walked forward calmly. Every step was taken very slowly but extremely steadily. Lotus petals surrounded him. Each petal opened and closed to give rise to other lotus flowers. These lotus flowers were much like in a space of their own. In the moments of opening and closing, it had devoured the fire of the great path. The great shaman walked toward Shen Tianzhan, step by step. He looked up slightly, and his eyes were extremely demonic. It was as if they could captivate and capture those who looked into them. Shen Tianzhan looked at those eyes and frowned. A horrific spiritual power invaded him, and instantly, a space divine matrix seemed to have appeared in his mind. Behind the great shaman, a radiant matrix appeared, and radiant brilliance bloomed upon the matrix with countless golden threads penetrating the void, covering Shen Tianzhan's body. Shen Tianzhan retreated, but the golden threads increased, and the matrix elevated toward the sky. Above the firmament, it turned into a matrix of space that sheltered the sky. With the endless space radiance now falling downward, Shen Tianzhan had nowhere to go, as the world was blocked. The crowd below looked up at the sky in horror. At the level of nirvana, it all depended on whose attack was the stronger. And Shen Tianzhan did not have the strength to destroy the great shaman. At this moment, could Shen Tianzhan bear the counterattack of the great shaman? The great shaman's body floated in the air, rising higher and higher, until he was integrated into the divine matrix that was above the sky. He raised the scepter and looked down at Shen Tianzhan, saying, "This is the art of judgment. Do you still want to continue the fight?" Shen Tianzhan looked up at the great shaman. His body still emitted the majesty of might, but he knew in his heart that he had already lost the battle, and he was not sure that he could bear the attack of the great shaman. For a moment, the fire of the sky dissipated, and the sensation of extreme heat disappeared immediately. The heated sky and earth restored as they were before. Seeing this scene, the great shaman lowered his hand and retracted the scepter. The divine light of space also disappeared, and his eyes were no longer terrible. The crowd below exhaled a sigh of relief. The battle that just occurred was like a dream. Qianye City Lord Shen Tianzhan was defeated, everyone said secretly in their hearts. Qianye City would be officially changing hands. This great shaman should be the top figure in Emperor Xia's realm. The top existence cultivated by the emperors was indeed awesome. Among the many cities in Crimson Dragon Realm, only a few city lords who were at the peak of their power could fight such figures. There were several peak existence cultivators in the Crimson Dragon Realm. Even though they claimed to be standing on the top of Nirvana Plain, there were rumors that some Nirvana saints had offended Renhuang, which accounted for their flight to the Crimson Dragon Realm to become the master of a city. Other Renhuang of the realm could come to the Crimson Dragon Realm, but they could not wreak havoc on its territory. Of course, the dispatch of the saints was not something the Crimson Dragon Emperor cared much about. Shen Tianzhan descended and landed on the ruins of the city lord's office in front of Yi Futian. He glanced down at Shen Jun, who was gravely injured, and saw despair in his eyes. His father, who was also defeated, was implicated because of him, and now the entire city lord's office was lost. All this was because he had wanted to use Yi Futian and his people. Now, it was not so easy to send away the deity that he had invited in. Yi Futian wanted Qianye City. Shen Tianzhan picked up Shen Jun's body. Yi Futian stood aside and did not stop him. The great shaman drifted down and descended next to Xiaqing Yuan. They just wanted Qianye City, and were not worried that Shen Tianzhan would go to the extreme. There was no need for it when he had already cultivated to this level. Turning around, Shen Tianzhan stopped and said, "I will stay." Then, he took Shen Jun going deeper into the city lord's office, which by now was half in ruins. "Great shaman, take over the city lord's office," Xiaqing Yuan said to him, and the great shaman nodded. The next step would be to firmly control the city lord's office. Since Shen Tianzhan chose to stay, he did not need to help, but he must not be given a chance to add to the chaos. "Who will be the city lord?" Xiaqing Yuan said, looking at Yi Futian. "Naturally, you princess." Yi Futian looked at Xiaqing Yuan. "I'm not interested," Xiaqing Yuan said lightly. "You'll take over." Yi Futian looked at Xiaqing Yuan, but saw that her eyes were focused far away. No one knew what she was thinking. "Princess, in the future, Qianye City could be the foundation of Xia Emperor Xia's realm in Crimson Dragon Realm. I am not suited for this duty," Yi Futian said. "Aren't you always complaining that you have no place in Emperor Xia's realm? Now, you will be named as the city lord of Qianye City. I will ask my father the emperor to make it official, and father will not object," said Xiaqing Yuan, looking at Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian was just a bodyguard for the princess. Yi Futian was speechless. Since when did he complain? Women did not make any sense. But it was much better sounding than being the bodyguard of the princess. "Boss, this she-devil must have been traumatized by Kong Xian." The voice of Black Wind Condor resounded in Yi Futian's mind. Not long ago, Kong Xian came to poach him. However, This clown had learned his lesson and dared not say it out loud, but only said it secretly to Yi Futian. Want to get beat up again? Yi Futian smiled at the little condor, and immediately he behaved. Very well. I will take over temporarily, but if I leave I will give up the position, Yi Futian said, but Xia Qingyuan ignored him. Next was to straighten out Qinya City. What happened at Qinya City soon came to pass, and all the cities knew that Yu Sheng came from Emperor Xia's realm. And now, Emperor Xia's realm had also seized a city in Crimson Dragon realm. However, although it was known at this time, it had not caused much disturbance. After all, these kinds of occurrences happened often in the Crimson Dragon realm, and the top figures had seen it all. At this time, inside a city in Crimson Dragon realm, there was a group of people in a palace. One of them was well known to Yi Futian, the crown prince of Dali dynasty Li Yao. After hearing the news brought to him by the messenger in front of him, Li Yao flashed a coldness in his eyes. Was it the great shaman of Emperor Xia's realm, who personally accompanied to guard? Now, they had even taken a city in Crimson Dragon realm. His Royal Highness, the strength of this great shaman is unfathomable. He has been following Emperor Xia all these years, and is definitely one of the peaks power of Emperor Xia's realm, said a nobleman clad in a golden python robe behind him. Li Yao nodded, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It seems that there will be a need for our imperial advisor of Dali. Qinya City began the reorganization process with the full support of the Situ clan. Shen Tianzhan was still staying in the city lord's office to cultivate. The old alliances of the city lord's office had all yielded in submission. Qinya City began the reorganization process with the full support of the Situ clan. Shen Tianzhan was still staying in the city lord's office to cultivate. The old alliances of the city lord's office had all yielded in submission. Gradually, cultivators of the Saint Plains who came with the great shaman took control of the city lord's office, and even planned to mobilize more help from Emperor Xia's realm. Since they had now taken a city in Crimson Dragon realm, naturally, it would need to be managed with care. Afterward, the city lord's office built an academy of cultivation in the center of Qinya City, and it caused a lot of talk in the surrounding cities. An academy of cultivation was not suitable for other cities in the Crimson Dragon realm save for the Crimson Dragon City. These cities were continually warring with one another and changed hands often, so the construction of an academy was a waste of time, energy, and resources. The cultivators that came out of the academy would likely end up being used by another. Only the Crimson Dragon City under the direct control of the Crimson Dragon Emperor was a suitable location. Because it was Qinya City, everyone just laughed it off. At the same time, in Emperor Li's realm within the Crimson Dragon region, Dali Dynasty, Emperor Li's Way, Imperial Advisor's residence. At this time, the Imperial Advisor was standing with his hands folded behind his back, staring at the sky. Fei Xue stood quietly next to the Imperial Advisor without disturbing him. At this time there were footsteps. It was a few disciples of the Imperial Advisor. Yin Yuan, Mr. Nanzhai, Mu Chunyang, and the others had arrived. Master. Yin Yuan and the others bowed. You all knew, right? The master lowered his head and spoke to them. Yin Yuan nodded. Li Yao and the Prince Regent both reported to the Emperor at the same time to ask the Imperial Advisor of Dali to go to the Crimson Dragon realm and create a territory there. At the same time, it was requested to assassinate someone in the Crimson Dragon realm, the seventh swordsman, who was undercover in the Dali dynasty, the same as Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm. This action of Li Yao and the Prince Regent were suspicious. Back then, they both suggested punishing the Imperial Advisor, but Emperor Li suppressed the matter, and the Imperial Advisor made concessions by resigning as the head of the Dali Academy. Moreover, when the Imperial Advisor and Yin Yuan released Yi Futian and sent him away, they had betrayed the Dali dynasty. And he had also said that he was the seventh swordsman in Dali dynasty, and only when he returned to Emperor Xia's dynasty would he be Yi Futian once again. He was the seventh swordsman at the time, so the Imperial Advisor's residence considered the relationship between master and apprentice. But now, for that matter, Although Emperor Li did not blame the imperial advisor, the situation in the Dali dynasty had changed subtly, and there must have been a seed of doubt planted in Emperor Li's heart. Now, this was an opportunity for the imperial advisor of Dali to prove himself. If he killed Yi Futian, then the imperial advisor was still the same as he was before, below one man, and above all the rest. Master, His Majesty wanted to test you, Yin Yuan said, and everyone else was silent. Of course, they were all too clear on this point. The imperial advisor of Dali's heart was also as clear as a mirror. Since that time, he had been cultivating at imperial advisor's residence, and had rarely asked about any matters of Dali. Emperor Li wanted to find a pretext to get him to come out again, and take control of Dali. Surely, there would no longer be any resistance then, and no one would dare to object. Naturally, this was because he valued the imperial advisor, but at the same time, it was also a test for him to see whether or not he was loyal to Dali dynasty. In a certain sense, he served as the imperial advisor with great power, and Emperor Li treated him well. Yi Futian was only a disciple. As a person of the opposing realm, there should be no hesitation, and there was no question about Emperor Li's action. However, that disciple for such a short time was the one he admired the most besides Yin Yuan. Although their positions were different, ultimately, it was difficult to make a move against him. What do you think? Asked the imperial advisor. Master, go, Yin Yuan said. His Majesty had already commanded them. If they did not obey, what would the emperor think? The seventh swordsman gave up the opportunity, and chose to return to Emperor Xia's realm. With his state of comprehension, seventh swordsman will understand and respect the master's choice. Mr. Nanjai also advised. The others did not speak, and Lu Chuan sighed. This time, it was all manipulated by Li Yao. Whatever happened before had a great impact on Li Yao. So, his report to Emperor Li this time was full of vitriol and bad intentions. Whatever choice they made would be the wrong one. The imperial advisor of Dali had been reluctant to get involved, because if he killed Yi Futian, judging from the value that Emperor Xia placed on Yi Futian, it would leave the imperial advisor's residence with little choice. If he didn't go, it would suggest that he had a difference in opinion. Now from Emperor Li to everyone in Dali dynasty, they were all of one mind, and he wanted the imperial advisor to go. Even the supporters of the imperial advisor had hoped that the imperial advisor could wash his name by killing Yi Futian and regain the power he once had in Dali. Under these circumstances, there was almost no other choice. Li Yao had counted on this too. Dad, Fei Xue called out. Her voice was a little low as she bowed her head slightly, and those eyes that were not seen were filled with tears. She knew the difficulties her father was facing about whether to go or not. However, did she wanted her father to face off with the seventh swordsman? The imperial advisor of Dali turned around. He smiled at Yin Yuan and the others. He then stroked Fei Xue's long hair, whispering, I am the imperial advisor of Dali, and as His Majesty had commanded me, I shall fight. Will you kill him? Fei Xue looked up slightly, facing the imperial advisor. Those from Emperor Xia's realm were escorted and protected by the great shaman. How do you know that Dali would win the battle between Emperor Li's and Emperor Xia's realm, in the Crimson Dragon realm? The imperial advisor said with a smile. Maybe the seventh swordsman will give us a surprise. In this battle, everyone had their stance, and he would do his best. This was his duty as the imperial advisor of Dali. Back when we sent him to Emperor Xia's realm, I said that in the future, if we ever met again on the battlefield, I would not be merciful, Yin Yuan said. Now they would meet on the battlefield. How did he answer? Imperial advisor asked Yin Yuan, because he had never mentioned this before. He said he would, Yin Yuan replied. The imperial advisor of Dali was stunned for a moment. He walked forward with a great laugh, saying, Nanjai, you stay here to take care of Fei Xue. The others will follow me to the palace. Yes. The disciples nodded. Dad, I'll go with you, Fei Xue cried out. The imperial advisor glanced back at her and said softly, Nanjai will take good care of you. As he finished, he continued to walk. Yin Yuan and the others followed closely behind. Mr. Nanjai and Fei Xue stayed, watching them as they left. Mr. Nanjai secretly sighed. This trip, whether it was a good omen or an evil one, perhaps the master already knew. As for Fei, how could the master possibly take her along? If the master did that, Emperor Li would question his motive of taking his family away. Second brother, will Dad and the seventh swordsman both be okay? Fei whispered in the direction of the departure of the imperial advisor. Her heart was extremely conflicted. This time meeting on the battlefield, she did not wish for either side to be hurt. But was this possible? Mr. Nanjai looked down at Fei and said softly, Fei, don't worry too much. Fei said nothing, and could only pray in her heart. This trip, it was best there was no fighting. If they fought, the hope was for everything to end peacefully. The imperial advisor had gone to Dali Palace for permission to depart, and the news caused great shock. Everyone knew the significance of this trip was far more than just killing Yi Futian. There was much significance behind it. What had happened with the seventh swordsman at the time had a significant impact on the imperial advisor of Dali, and even affected the structure of Dali dynasty. The prince regent had once again regained power, and led the nobles of Dali to the epitome of their power in Dali dynasty. The trip of the imperial advisor of Dali could change the situation. So naturally, many were observing closely. To the imperial advisor of Dali, one step forward in the right direction meant that everything would open up, but a false step may destroy the myth of Dali henceforth. After the imperial advisor decided to depart, the third prince personally requested to lead some cultivators along to assist the imperial advisor, and the emperor agreed. In time, a large group of powerful cultivators set off toward Crimson Dragon Realm through a teleportation grand matrix. Yi Futian, who was far away in Qinya city of the Crimson Dragon Realm, knew nothing of what had happened in Emperor Li's realm. He was still cultivating in Qinya city. Li Yao should have made some movement. In a blink of an eye, some time passed. On this day, inside a city in Crimson Dragon Realm, Li Yao looked up into the void and saw a large group coming. Their appearance gladdened Li Yao's heart, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He put his hands together and greeted those descending from the sky. Greetings to the third royal brother and the imperial advisor. His Royal Highness. The imperial advisor nodded in return. The Li Yao of today was vastly different from before. After entering the Saint Plain, he became even more unfathomable. In the past, the imperial advisor released the seventh swordsman, saying that as long as he was the seventh swordsman, none shall pursue him. But now, the seventh swordsman is Yi Futian, who went undercover inside Dali dynasty and stole many of our methods of cultivation, including the deed of thorough comprehension of the imperial advisor, as well as the sword of Kasayapa, and other books from Dali Academy. Li Yao continued. Now, Yi Futian has entered the Saint Plain, and is highly valued by Emperor Xia. Even Xia Qingyuan accompanies him frequently. This man must be eliminated. Since the imperial advisor has arrived, let's head straight away to Qinya city, and get rid of him. His Highness has been through the battle of the Empty Realm, so you know that before the war, all three parties had to sacrifice to the flag, and then the three Renhuangs may begin the war. Yi Futian and Princess Xia Qingyuan were there, as well as the great shaman, which was sufficient to represent Emperor Xia's realm. If we desire war, we must first declare war, replied the imperial advisor. Imperial advisor, this is an emergency, and the person spied on our Dali dynasty. How can we declare war by formal means and run the risk of them fleeing? Li Yao frowned. He instead believed that the imperial advisor wanted to allow Yi Futian to escape. The message previously relayed by His Highness was that Emperor Xia's realm captured a city within the Crimson Dragon realm, which is to be the foundation of Emperor Xia's realm here. If so, we will also occupy a city and use it as a base to declare war against Qinya city and Yi Futian's crime against Dali, and take him down with reason. If the people of Emperor Xia's realm flee without a fight, it would not be too late for us to chase after them and eliminate them. The imperial advisor continued. If I take someone to ambush Yi Futian, whose plane is way below mine, our Dali princes who were outside might also be ambushed by top figures of Emperor Xia's realm. Li Yao looked at the imperial advisor. Although he was the prince of Dali dynasty, He had no right to command the imperial advisor. Otherwise, the situation today would not have existed. If this was really what the imperial advisor intended to do, there was nothing he could do. Even though he wanted to kill Yi Futian, he did not have such a strong power within his grasp that would allow him to move the great shaman. So he had to use some leverage. Let's do as the imperial advisor says, the third prince said. Very well. Li Yao nodded. His voice was somewhat grim. In the Crimson Dragon realm, from the cities in the area surrounding Crimson Dragon City, came the news that another city had changed hands. In the Crimson Dragon realm, from the cities in the area surrounding Crimson Dragon City, came the news that another city had changed hands. The men who seized the city were cultivators from Emperor Li's realm, and planned to rename the city as Li City. In a short amount of time, there were 2 consecutive seizures of cities, and both were done by Runhuang realms, which caused a lot of discussions. Moreover, many top figures had maps of the Crimson Dragon realm, and they knew that the Emperor Li's realm and Emperor Xiao's realm were 2 major adjacent Runhuang realms. Then this sudden seizure of the city by Emperor Li's realm without warning, did it have anything to do with the cultivators of Emperor Xiao's realm over at Qinya City? Soon they knew the answer. After Emperor Li's realm captured the city, a messenger was sent to Qinya City. They went to the city lord's office and handed over a declaration of war. In Qinya City, when Yi Futian received the declaration of war, there was a slight disturbance in his heart. He put down the declaration of war and stood on the steps of the stairs. He looked into the distance, sighing silently. This seemed to be different from what he had expected. Why did the person who came have to be the imperial advisor of Dali? Behind him, a figure stepped forward and stood beside him, also looking into the distance. Man plans, God laughs, Xia Qingyuan said softly. Yi Futian's goal when he first came to Crimson Dragon Realm was to gain a foothold in Crimson Dragon Realm. He asked the Crimson Dragon Emperor to borrow the teleportation Grand Matrix to cross the border to Supreme Path Realm. The Crimson Dragon Realm was the main realm of the region, and its teleportation Grand Matrix was connected to various Runhuang's realms in the region. However, to cross the region to reach the higher realm was not something easily done. One must go through the Crimson Dragon Emperor. Therefore, coming to the Crimson Dragon Realm was also a trial. Before leaving, however, Yi Futian was reminded of the incident of being exposed while at Emperor Li's realm. If someone inside Emperor Xiao's palace did it, then there was a chance that this trip may be exposed as well. Therefore, he asked Xia Qingyuan for help, and had prepared for it. He wanted to wait for Li Yao in this Crimson Dragon Realm. As long as Li Yao took the initiative to kill him, there was a chance to get rid of him. But Yi Futian had not expected that the person sent from Emperor Li's realm would be the imperial advisor of Dali. What happened at the time caused great havoc in Dali. It ended with the imperial advisor resigning from his post at the Dali Academy. Common sense would dictate that anyone but the imperial advisor to be used to deal with him. Weren't they concerned that the imperial advisor would let him go again? But apparently, Dali did not follow this thought pattern. They planned to use the imperial advisor to deal with him. This must have been a dirty trick thought up by Li Yao. Naturally, he knew how nasty the situation was. Now he was caught in a dilemma. This situation was not what he had hoped for. The two of them stood there silently, not speaking. Yi Futian picked up the declaration of war again and turned to the opposite side. On that side, there was a line of writing on it, "Clear conscience, never fear." Xia Qingyuan turned around and glanced at it. She was now a little curious about this imperial advisor of Dali. The imperial advisor of Dali must have known that you would feel torn about this. So he wrote these 4 words. "No matter how you choose, I have no preferences," Xia Qingyuan said softly. Fight or retreat, she was fine with either. "Thank you very much," Yi Futian said softly. The master came in person to fulfill his obligation. We have already established a foothold in the Crimson Dragon Realm, and have taken Qinya City. How can we walk away from it now? And if we walk away, can we come back again? He smiled and then sliced a corner off of his robe. With the sound of tearing, an edge of the robe came off. Xian Qingyuan focused her eyes on Yi Futian's action. Her heart was slightly disturbed. Was this a gesture to break away? Why? Yi Futian engraved a line of words on that piece of clothing. No mercy on the battlefield. When he was done, he walked forward, ready to dispatch it with a messenger to Li City and hand it to the imperial advisor. The imperial advisor would understand what he meant. Emperor Li ordered the imperial advisor to come. He must fight with all his strength and kill him. He must not show mercy, otherwise, it would be disloyal to Emperor Li. Emperor Li must have had his own take on what had happened. If it happened again, it would be difficult to predict what would happen next. Therefore, he cut off the corner of his robe to send a message. The declaration on the robe was delivered to the imperial advisor, and this exchange caused much attention within the Crimson Dragon realm. These two Renhuang's realms seemed to be on the verge of starting a great war in the Crimson Dragon realm. In this battle, who would win? However, neither side proceeded to start the war. As time passed, the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon was drawing closer. The people of all major cities had all submitted a list of those who would be participating in the battle. But this time, Qinya City did not plan to participate. On this day, Situ Yen came to the city lord's office and found Yi Futian. Situ Yen had also heard about the news of the declaration of war by Emperor Li's realm, but she did not ask. This was not under her purview. City Lord Yi, Situ Yen called out. Now that Yi Futian was named the city lord of Qinya City, the title of City Lord Yi seemed fitting. Is there anything I can do for you? Yi Futian asked with a smile. After this battle of the Sleeping Dragon, it will be the 10th battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Do you know that after every 10th of the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, there will be a grand event for all those who have received the Rising Dragon? Situ Yen asked Yi Futian. I do know. Yi Futian nodded. He had known this very early on. Therefore, he had insisted on Yu Sheng taking part in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. It's good for you to know that this time, it will be a huge opportunity. Situ Yen nodded. The winners of the 10th battle of the Sleeping Dragons, who got the Rising Dragon order, were all top figures. It could be said that they were all one step away from the Saint Plane, right underneath being saints. Immediately following, there would be a super showdown between the strongest. So, when Yu Sheng entered the battle, and when Situ Yen saw Kong Xian, she thought, if Yu Sheng wins the battle, what will he do when he faces Kong Xian? In the end, Yu Sheng was given the Rising Dragon, but Situ Yen didn't think about what would happen later. Yu Sheng was strong enough. Even if he faced other characters who had received the Rising Dragon, such as Kong Xian, his strength would be equal to them, and he would not be inferior. Furthermore, this face-off forbade killing. After all, they were geniuses who had obtained the Rising Dragon and were eligible to join the Crimson Dragon army. Well, Yi Futian nodded, and among the 10 strong men who won the Rising Dragon, one would be chosen, which was equivalent to picking the strongest among the countless top figures in the Crimson Dragon realm. That person would receive the Crimson Dragon Emperor's reward. They would also enter the most powerful palace of cultivation in Crimson Dragon realm, the regional palace, to cultivate. The regional palace was known as the place to train the regional kings of the realm. Many of the people who came out of it had become upper-level figures in the Crimson Dragon army, not just ordinary members. There were very few cultivators in the regional palace, which could be described as rare. It was similar to Dali Academy, but it was far stronger than Dali Academy. This was the gathering place of the kings of the realms, created by the Crimson Dragon Emperor. From there Renhuang were born. Renhuang of all realms were also willing to send future descendants to cultivate there. Therefore, many of those who participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon were aiming at the regional palace, and wanted to seize an opportunity that could change their lives. Such a place was where Futian hoped that Yu Sheng, Wuchen, and even the third brother could all enter to cultivate. However, among the winners of the 10th Rising Dragon, only one would be selected. Therefore, Yi Futian intended Yu Sheng to be the one who entered the regional palace, and only Yu Sheng could fight. Otherwise, the third brother and Yi Wuchen, strong as they were, could they be certain to beat the 10 who had obtained the Rising Dragon? Everyone besides Kong Xian and Kong Zhan were people he had fought before. Who else could guarantee the win other than Yu Sheng? Even for someone as strong as Xia Qingyuan, there would be pressure. If there was an accident on the battlefield, such as being ganged up on, a strike was highly likely. You asked me to find out what's going on in Li City. They will send someone to participate in the next battle of the Sleeping Dragon, and just in time for the 10th. Whoever gets the Rising Dragon will meet Yu Sheng and the others, Situ Yen continued. A flash crossed Yi Futian's eyes as he looked at Situ Yen. Might the battle between the two Renhuang realms begin here? Was this the will of the imperial advisor? Or was it the will of Li Yao? If someone from the Dali dynasty were to join in the battle, and if neither of them was in the Saint Plain, then it would be one or both of them. At the time, the two strongest cultivators below the Saint Plain in Dali dynasty were Dihao of Daily Mountain and Dong Chun of Dali Academy. Later, Dihao defeated Dong Chun, and he defeated Dihao. It was just that, had they been brought over to the Crimson Dragon realm, he heard that the third prince had arrived with the imperial advisor. And now it was the third prince who was in charge of Dali Academy. I know, thank you, Yi Futian said to Situ Yen. I'll go back now, Situ Yen said, then turned to leave. The Battle of Sleeping Dragon was here once again, and the Rising Dragon platform at Crimson Dragon City once again became the gathering place of countless cultivators. As usual, the castle was crowded with people of the peak principalities everywhere. Many of the cultivators of the Dali dynasty were there, such as the third prince and Li Yao. This time, the people of Dali would participate in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The imperial advisor of Dali, Yen Yuan, and the others had also arrived today. At the top of the castle, all eyes were fixed on the huge cylinder covered by the light screen. Such a cruel battle, and the style of martial arts could indeed produce a group of top characters, fanning the interests in martial arts and its success. However, such a cruel way of competition was not greatly favored by the imperial advisor of Dali, so he was little lacking in interest. Great teacher, about a month ago, the people of Emperor Xia's realm swept through the powerful men at the Rising Dragon platform, especially Yi Futian's good friend Yu Sheng, whose strength suppresses cultivators of all sides. He made a name for himself, Li Yao said to Yin Yuan, who was next to him. He continued, what does the great teacher think about Dihao and Dong Chun of Dali's chances? I don't know, Yin Yuan responded lightly. You will know after the exchange, Li Yao said. He didn't care about Yin Yuan's cold and arrogant attitude. He was already used to it. Just opposite them, a group came quietly. Yin Yuan and others looked at them instantly, and saw Yi Futian arrive with many cultivators of Emperor Xia's realm dynasty. He was accompanied by the great shaman, who was clad in the cloak. Yi Futian walked to the edge of the castle, his attention focused on the imperial advisor of Dali, and Yin Yuan opposite of him. There was a smile in his eyes. When they parted in the past, they never expected to see each other this way. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The imperial advisor of Dali and Yin Yuan, likewise, looked toward Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian appeared as the seventh swordsman, and the only time Yin Yuan saw his true identity was the time when he escorted Yi Futian back to Emperor Xia's realm. The imperial advisor of Dali and Yin Yuan, likewise, looked toward Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian appeared as the seventh swordsman, and the only time Yin Yuan saw his true identity was the time when he escorted Yi Futian back to Emperor Xia's realm. This was the first time that the imperial advisor of Dali had seen Yi Futian's true visage, but he still recognized him at first glance. Although his temperament had changed completely, but it was still outstanding. Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm greets the imperial advisor and the great teacher. Yi Futian bowed slightly toward the imperial advisor, and Yin Yuan in the opposite direction. He referred himself as Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm, was a clear marking of the boundary, as he did not address them as master or brother any longer. Respect and boundary were not mutually exclusive. If they got too close, it might cause them trouble instead. He had sent the message using the fragment of his robe, and the master should understood his intention. Next to him, Xia Qingyuan also looked in the opposite direction and said, Xia Yuan of Emperor Xia's realm greets the imperial advisor of Dali. The imperial advisor looked at the two and nodded with a smile. Yi Futian, I once said that the moment you return to Emperor Xia's realm, and we meet on the battlefield, I will not be merciful. You should be careful in the future. Yin Yuan said to Yi Futian. Yi Futian smiled and nodded and replied, and my response is still the same. On the side, Li Yao listened to the conversation and looking a little gloomy. Was this a complete disregard of his presence? From the moment Yi Futian arrived, he had never acknowledged him. As if he didn't exist at all. How insulting this was. Xia Yuan, you have received the declaration of war? Li Yao looked at Xia Yuan and asked. Xia Yuan looked coldly at Li Yao and heard him continuing. What Yi Futian did in Dali were sins beyond forgiveness. If you are willing to surrender him to us, then we will treat this whole affair as if nothing ever happened. Otherwise, the consequences are yours to bear entirely. After the defeat of the Battle of the Empty Realm, someone was sent to ambush and had infiltrated deep inside without being detected. Li Yao, where did you get the courage to even open your mouth? Xia Yuan continued. I heard that you have now entered into the Saint Plane, just at the same time that Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm was also entering the divine path. Since you can't let this go, you might as well fight a battle to the death. What say you? When Li Yao heard Xia Yuan's words, his face darkened. To fight to death against Yi Futian. Although Li Yao himself was also quite excellent, but to have him face off against Yi Futian in the same realm, he had no confidence of winning at all. During the battle in the Empty Realm, the battle between Yi Futian and Di Hao was a peerless match. It was rumored that before he became saint, Yi Futian had forcefully gone to the Xiao clan and killed Xiao Sheng, who had already entered the Saint Plane. As a peak sage, he had defeated the existence of a saint and used that battle to enter the divine path. Such was Yi Futian. And how could he fight against that? Li Yao, thank you for the care you've taken while I was at Dali. Yi Futian glanced at Li Yao, and suddenly Li Yao's eyes were full of murderous intent. Yi Futian's words inadvertently poked at his wound. Just wait and see. Li Yao looked down at the rising dragon platform. Yi Futian took out a storage ring, which contained the treasures and sacred spirit stones that he had earned in the last battle of the sleeping dragon. He turned around and looked behind him, and smiled at Situ Yen, saying, How about doing me a favor? Go ahead, Situ Yen said. Put it all on Di Hao. Yi Futian smiled. You can also make some adjustments, but don't go to the extremes. I don't have absolute confidence this time either, and can only say that the chances are good, about 50%. All right, Situ Yen nodded. They had missed an opportunity last time. This time, she believed in Yi Futian. Di Hao's strength was acknowledged by Yi Futian. At the time at Dali Dynasty, besides him, Di Hao was truly invincible. He was the adopted son of King Tiandao, a peerless figure cultivated by Daily Mountain. After the defeat of Di Hao in that battle, and after he had cultivated for such a long period of time, presumably, his realm had advanced, and he must definitely be one of the top figures below the Saint Plane. Of course, the people participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon were not weaklings themselves, and there must be stronger opponents, so he did not have absolutely assurance. But Yu Sheng had a major victory last month at the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, and so Dali had dispatched the likes of Di Hao and the others to combat. Must be because they wanted a definitive result, and would be employing their full capacity. Those who answered the call would not just be Di Hao, but also several other top figures like Dong Qin. Therefore, Yi Futian was willing to bet on this opponent. If he lost, it was only the winnings from last time. He did not put any of his own capital in, and did not ask for Xia Yuan for a loan again. So it was just for the fun of it. Soon, the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon would erupt, and it would be another raging battle. Di Hao, Dong Chun and the others fought for themselves, and their strength has increased compared to before. Di Hao's God-burying bell, tripod of dragon and elephant, and the sword of Cassiopeia were all top-notch offensive techniques. When the three major life spirits sang in unison, their power of might was amazing beyond belief, and would defeat the opponents consecutively. Dongchen summoned the Dharma body of the Vajra. Many arms blasted out at the same time, and it was equally overpowering. Even on a stage such as the Battle of Sleeping Dragon, he still belonged with the top characters. After all, the two of them and Dali were also the ones who could overcome Li Yao. Furthermore, if it wasn't for the fact that both of them were defeated once, they might have already entered the divine path. Of course, entering the Saint Plane required opportunity and timing, and now that their realm was on par, they were only waiting for the right time. In addition to the two, there was a very strong cultivator that Yi Futian had seen only once before, and they had made exchanges before. It was the swordsman at Daily Mountain, who had first used the sword of Kasayapa, 7 Sins. At that time, many thought that he would be the opponent of the premier swordsman of Sword Mountain, Jian Wu, but Yi Futian had seized the weakness of Jian Wu and defeated him with a single move. Now 7 Sins had become even stronger. At the end of the battle, showdowns were between the strongest. Di Hao, Dongchen, 7 Sins and others joined forces to overpower the Rising Dragon platform and defeated many opponents. Finally, the three were successfully ascended to heaven. Witnessing this, Li Yao expressed a look of satisfaction. This way, Di Hao and the others could face off with Yu Sheng of Emperor Xia's realm. Was Yi Futian trying to send Yu Sheng into regional palace? Not so fast. They were all from the Runhuang's realm, and their goal was not necessarily to join the Crimson Dragon army, like the people of the Crimson Dragon realm. But if they could enter the regional palace, it was not a possibility to be refused. Kong Xian also arrived today to observe the battle. Like last month, the winner of this game would become her opponent. After 7 days, whoever is in possession of the Rising Dragon may take part in the battle of the regional palace, the Saint in the Void announced, and this couldn't be more familiar to the people in Crimson Dragon realm. The light screen disappeared. Li Yao glanced at Yi Futian and the others, then turned to move in another direction, walking toward Kong Zhan and Kong Xian. It's been a long time since I saw the two of you after the Battle of the Empty Realm, Li Yao said. Yi Futian looked over there, understood Li Yao's intention. Did Li Yao intend to continue the Battle of the Empty Realm? At the time, in the Battle of the Empty Realm, Emperor Li's realm teamed up with the Peacock Demon Emperor's realm, but it was obstructed by him. Now would Li Yao make another attempt? Kong Xian, Kong Zhan, Jialofeng, coupled with Di Hao, Dongchen, and 7 Sins from Emperor Li's realm. Such combination could indeed be considered as extremely powerful and a nearly invincible team. Of course, this strong showdown was not only for them, but also for the top figures in the Crimson Dragon realm. Perhaps, their strength was not necessarily weaker than Di Hao and Dongchen. Even Yu Sheng would feel a touch of pressure in such a battlefield. Had I known, I would have participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon this time, Xia Qingyuan said when she saw Li Yao went to Kong Xian. If she and Gu Donglu had participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon this time around, they would have been able to suppress Di Hao and Dongchen, and the Battle of the Regional Palace, after that would have not much to do with Li Yao and the others. It is better for the princess to not get involved in these killings and fightings, Yi Futian said with a smile while Xia Qingyuan gave him a dirty look. Could one avoid fighting in the world of cultivation? Her reputation in Emperor Xia's realm was not based on her breeding. Let's go. Yi Futian glanced at the direction of the imperial advisor and Yin Yuan, and slightly nodded at them, then turned to leave. His main purpose for coming was to see the imperial advisor and his party. As for the battle between the two sides, naturally it would not take place here. The Crimson Dragon City was the only city directly ruled by the Crimson Dragon Emperor. No one dared to start a war here, so a battle would start somewhere outside the city. After Yi Futian returned, the two sides remained in peace, because after 7 days, there would be a battle. This face-off would be held in the regional palace. Anyone who has received the Rising Dragon in the 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon may participate in the war. But of course, they could also abstain. In this battle, no killing was allowed, therefore no death would occur, so no one would abstain. Many top characters participate in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon as trials, to join the Crimson Dragon army, and to exchange with other top opponents. In the end, They also wanted a chance to enter the regional palace. Of course, this was too difficult. There could only be one winner of the 10 battles of the sleeping dragon. The invincible one who could overpower everyone else may enter the regional palace to cultivate. There was a crimson river in Crimson Dragon City. This river was a boiling river, like fire of magma. The fire of the great path flowed within the river. The regional palace was situated on the Crimson River. The sky around the majestic regional palace was of a reddish color, and the sky was full of red glow all day long. The entire regional palace was shrouded by the will of the great path. The will of the way was omnipresent and could be felt distinctively at any time. Some people said that underneath the regional palace, there was a great treasure of Renhuang, which was the cause of such a wondrous sight. Some people said that the entire regional palace was a rare treasure in itself, which was casted by the power of Renhuang, and gathered the will of the great path of heaven and earth. At this time, in the Crimson River, there was a figure standing on the regional palace, and his gaze directed toward the opposite side of the Crimson River. These people had extraordinary temperament, and were full of peerless beauty. Some were surrounded by the great path, while others were hidden by the glory of Renhuang. When cultivating at the regional palace, one must always release power to defend against the burning will of the great path at all times. Therefore the breath of these people could be felt distinctly. Those who cultivated in the regional palace came from all the Renhuang realms of the Crimson Dragon realm. Some were from other royal family, and some were the descendants of the top figures from all walks of life who were sent here to cultivate. Regional Palace was known as the strongest place for cultivation in Crimson Dragon Realm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Many people had gathered at the other end of the Crimson River. Many people had gathered at the other end of the Crimson River. Cultivators from all over the Crimson Dragon Realm had come, and were prepared to witness this battle between top fighters. The best cultivators from the Crimson Dragon Realm always came to each battle of the Sleeping Dragon, but only a few of them could receive the title of Rising Dragon. However, today, 10 cultivators who had received this title were there, and had chosen to send forth the strongest among them. It was evident that this was going to be a special match. Even though there was no betting on this match, and no one would die, it still drew much more attention than the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Everyone was looking straight ahead. The regional palace was there. It was the place that countless cultivators yearned for. The regional palace seemed to be covered by the red clouds that filled the sky like blood. To go there was everyone's dream. From where they were, they could faintly make out figures atop the regional palace. It seemed that they were interested in the battle as well. After this battle, another person would enter the regional palace and cultivate with them. At that moment, a group of figures walked up. There was suddenly a hubbub, and everyone's gaze turned to there. They saw the powerful figures walking towards the Crimson River. The cultivators from Xiang City have arrived, everyone thought. Xiang City was absolutely among the best of the cities around Crimson Dragon City. Just like Qingye City and Demon Peacock City, Xiang City had also been founded by one of Renhuang's realms in the Crimson Dragon realm. But its history was much longer. Emperor Xiang's realm had made an arrangement with the Crimson Dragon's realm many years ago. Now they sent out their forces from within the Crimson Dragon's realm. They were extremely powerful. Emperor Xiang always sent his descendants to the Crimson Dragon realm to train. The person who had come from Xiang City to take part in this battle at the regional palace was one of Emperor Xiang's sons, Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan was extraordinarily talented and had great combat ability. In the battle of the Sleeping Dragon that he had taken part in, he had used his incredible strength to sweep away all other cultivators. He had dominated the battlefield. The Sleeping Dragon had risen into the sky, and Xiang Nan had been entitled as a rising dragon. Everyone sized him up, although he looked refined and cultivated, and there was a well-educated look to his face. Those who had witnessed the battle of the Sleeping Dragon knew that under his harmless appearance, there was a wild fighting spirit. If Xiang Nan's face deceived you, you would die a miserable death. Xian Nan was, without a doubt, one of the favorites to win this battle of selection. Before Yu Sheng appeared, he would have been in the top 3. But now many people did not dare to rank him so highly. It was not that Xiongnan wasn't powerful. It was just that many others were not inferior to him in any way. Xiongnan stepped forward, and everyone subconsciously made a path for him, letting him walk to the bank of the Crimson River and look out over the water. "It seems that we got here pretty early," said Xiongnan with a warm smile. He was looking at the regional palace before him. His eyes were sharp and domineering. Today, most of the conversations in Crimson Dragon City and the surrounding cities were about the conflict between Emperor Li's realm and Emperor Xia's realm, and the conflict between Li City and Qianya City. It seemed that these conflicts had been brought to this battle at the regional palace. It looked like this would be their battlefield. How ridiculous. He had gone to see the battle several days ago. Di Hao and Dong Chun were incredibly strong and graceful, but could they beat him? If someone dared to say this, he would call them a fool. At this battle before the regional palace, there was only one opponent for him, the one from the ancient imperial city. There was another hubbub, as other cultivators started to arrive. The cultivators from the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm arrived, led by Kong Xian and Kong Zhan, and they came to the bank of the Crimson River. At this battle, even those as strong as Kong Xian and Kong Zhan were not assured of victory. All they could say was that they would try their hardest to win. The people of the Dali dynasty arrived as well, led by the 3 princes. Di Hao, Dong Chun and 7 Sins were all there. Li Yao searched all around with his eyes. It seemed like he was looking for someone. After a while, Li Yao looked up into the sky. There he saw a group of figures descending. Suddenly, everyone all around made a place for them and watched them as they approached. Yu Sheng had arrived. This was someone who had previously been unknown, but after the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, his name shook the 4 corners of the earth. Yu Sheng of Emperor Xia's realm was incredibly powerful. He had swept away all the other cultivators at the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. With his terrible power, he had even thrown the Demon Saint Crimson Dragon. It had been a truly frightening display of power. A monster like that would certainly show up at this battle. Yi Futian appeared as well, and glanced over at Li Yao. Was he going to try and have Di Hao and Dong Chun try to stop Yu Sheng? Was that even possible? Di Hao and Dong Chun may have been strong, but they probably could not stand up to Yu Sheng in his current power. The cultivators from the ancient imperial city have arrived. At that moment, a clamor rose from the crowd. Everyone looked off into the distance. Whoever was coming was even more worthy of their attention than Prince Xiongnan had been. When he heard this, Yi Futian also looked off into the distance, where he saw the ones who were coming. The youth in the front appeared to be even younger than he was. His golden robes were shining brightly, and they were very flashy and beautiful. This was Xing Chou of the ancient imperial city. The reason that Yi Futian paid attention to the ancient imperial city was that it was very legendary, having the word imperial in its name. The ruler of the city was not an emperor, and had not been founded by another Renhuang. But it still had the word imperial in its name. That was an incredibly arrogant thing to do. The reason the ancient imperial city was legendary was that it only had one great power in it. This force ruled the city, and no one dared to object. The ruler of the ancient imperial city was a legendary figure himself. He called himself Ninth Servant, which seemed like the name of an inferior person. But in reality, Ninth Servant was looked at by many people as the foremost city lord in the Crimson Dragon realm, and the strongest of all the lords. Some said that he had already made it through the Saint Plane, and was one step away from the Renhuang level. Ninth Servant was but a step away from the Renhuang plane. With such a glorious reputation, there was no doubt that he was an extremely powerful figure. It was rumored that Ninth Servant had been a vassal of Emperor Zhan of Emperor Zhan's realm. After Emperor Zhan fell, his realm was occupied, and so Ninth Servant escaped with Emperor Zhan's descendants and brought them to the Crimson Dragon realm. The city that they occupied was named the Ancient Imperial City. And Xing Chou of the Ancient Imperial City was one of the powerful figures taking part in the battle before the regional palace. Even after Yu Sheng had revealed his incredible combat ability, Xing Chou was still ranked above him. This showed how legendary the ancient imperial city was, and how powerful Xingqiu was. Yu Sheng had thrown a demon dragon at the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Everyone had seen it. The cultivators of the Crimson Dragon's realm were not stupid. But even so, they still thought that Xingqiu would be the one to enter the regional palace. So this Xingqiu must be even stronger than Yi Futian had thought. He could even shake saint-level figures. Kong Xian and Kong Zhan looked at Xingqiu as well. They knew that he was their most powerful opponent besides Yu Sheng. No one at this battle of the regional palace could say that they were assured of victory. There were so many powerful opponents and no weak ones. Who would make this battle their stage? At that moment, a group of powerful cultivators descended from the sky. They wore red robes embroidered with dragon patterns, making them look like imperial robes. This was the symbol of the Crimson Dragon army. They alighted on the bank of the Crimson River. Something seemed to be initiated as they arrived, as there was a burst of power that descended from the sky. The power was nearly divine and suppressed everyone's spirits and will. A heavenly mirror appeared up in the red sky, shining with brilliant morning light upon the Crimson River. The light of the great path fell upon them all, and upon the river, illuminating the battlefield. The light was shining directly upon everyone's battlefield. Is this battle going to take place under the might of the great path? Whispered Yi Futian as he felt the power of the mirror. He looked at Su Ke and Qin Zhuang behind him and said, "If you're not going to fight, you should forfeit now." With a battle at this level, even though they wouldn't die, there was no point in participating if they weren't strong enough. "I won't fight," said Su Ke with a nod. He had not yet been enlightened, so there was indeed no point in him fighting. Anyone on the battlefield would have been able to crush him. "I want to feel what it's like," said Huang Jiuge. He knew that since he had not been enlightened either, he was not strong enough, but he still wanted to try. He was only a step away. This battle would be another chance for him. "I want to try too," said Qin Zhuang. Yi Wuqian looked out over the Crimson River with a solemn expression. He would naturally fight. An opportunity like this was rare indeed. Those who won the title of Rising Dragon in the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon may come, said the cultivator in the air above the Crimson River. A group of cultivators stepped forward, advancing onto the battlefield. The victors of the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon arrived one by one. Everyone felt their blood boiling in anticipation as they watched those figures before the fight. What kind of contest would this be? There were top figures like Xingqiu of the ancient imperial city, Xiang Nan, the prince of Xiang City, Yu Sheng, who had thrown a giant demon dragon, Kong Xian and Kong Zhan of the demon peacock emperor's realm, who possessed the 9-color divine light, Di Hao and Dong Chen of Emperor Li's realm, and others. How could a contest like this not excite people? Far off in the direction of the regional palace, several figures rose into the air. They crossed the Crimson River and stopped just outside the battlefield. It seemed that they had come to watch the battle. Everyone gave a sharp cry when they saw who one of them was. Xingkai of the ancient imperial city, was a hero of the Crimson Dragon realm. When he had fought at the battle of the regional palace, he had swept away all his opponents. He had been unopposed. After becoming a saint, he had remained undefeated. It was said that even after entering the regional palace, he had swept away all opponents there, who were on the same plane as him. There was so much glory about him. He was truly a legend of his generation. And he was Xingqiu's elder brother. He had personally come from the regional palace to witness the battle at the Crimson River. He was waiting for his brother Xingqiu to sweep away all his opponents, just like he had, using his once-in-a-generation strength to cross the Crimson River and enter the regional palace to cultivate. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The Crimson River flowed like a stream of magma, dyeing the world red. The Crimson River flowed like a stream of magma, dyeing the world red. Light shone from the heavenly mirror in the sky, illuminating the space for the battle of the Great Path. There were more than 30 people on the battlefield at that moment. In total, There were over 30 people who had achieved the title of Rising Dragon in the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon. An average of about 3 people for each battle. But many of them were merely secondary characters. In most people's eyes, only a few people were participating in this battle at the Crimson River. Is Xingqiu like his brother? Can he use his unmatched strength to sweep away all others on the battlefield and enter the regional palace to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brother Xingkai? Everyone watched in solemn silence. They had high hopes for Xingqiu of the ancient imperial city. Could Xiangnan, the prince of Emperor Xiang's realm, Kong Xian and Kong Chan, the descendants of the demon peacock emperor, and the incomparably overbearing Yu Sheng threaten Xingqiu? But before this, Yu Sheng and the others from Qianya City would probably have to come into conflict with those from Emperor Li's realm. And they were also compelling figures. "Begin," said the head of the Crimson Dragon army, up in the sky. He had not stated the rules for this battle. Nothing was forbidden in this battle, save for killing your opponents and relying on outside help. The last person left on the battlefield would be the winner. There were no other rules. You could fight as you pleased. They only cared about the ending. The strongest one among them would be rewarded by the Crimson Dragon Emperor and would enter the regional palace to cultivate. Powerful auras swept out all over the battlefield. Everyone stood there solemnly and did not move. Just the burning air coming off the Crimson River and the majesty of the great path descending from the sky were suffocating enough to make them release their power to resist them. With a long cry, Jialo Feng rose into the air. Everyone looked up at him and saw a brilliant golden light shining from him. A divine golden rock appeared around his body. Jialo Feng of the Jialo royal family's true body was that of a golden rock. The brilliant light of the great path flowed across the rock's divine wings. He narrowed his eyes proudly and swept them over Yu Sheng and the others. At the Battle of Empty Realm, he had not only been defeated by Yi Futian, he had dominated him. He had been utterly humiliated. But he was of the Jialo royal family. Zap! A bolt of golden lightning pierced through the air with great speed. In a flash, the rock's feathers shot out, sharper than any sword, cutting through the air as they sped towards Yu Sheng. Boom! There was the sound of a mighty footstep as dark golden light flowed and blazed. The wind whistled as Yu Sheng raised his fist, slamming it into the sky, making even Jialo Feng's mighty form tremble a bit. The wild fist tore through the air and collided violently with the onrushing feathers. There was an ear-piercing grating noise that filled heaven and earth as Yu Sheng's fist was scratched by the feathers, but they could not cut through it, and some of them were even slammed to the ground. Jialo Feng was sent flying backward. Such power! Everyone felt their hearts tremble. Yu Sheng of Qianya City seemed to have the strength of a god. He was not inferior in the least to those who had the blood of Ren Huang, and was possibly even superior to them. Could it be that he was the descendant of some powerful figure of Emperor Xia's realm? "You are no opponent for him, Jialo," came a voice. Kong Xian stepped forward with her peacock feathers spread out, covering the sky. Divine light shone from her. When she spread her feathers, they seemed to contain the power of the great path and the ability to suppress heaven and earth. She could naturally see how strong and talented Yu Sheng was. He was a natural-born warrior. At the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, he had thrown a demon saint, and from this, his power was undeniable. He was indeed a madman when it came to battle. Even though Jialo Feng's attack power was peerless, he was still at a disadvantage when faced with such resistance. This showed how strong Yu Sheng was. Kong Xian stepped forward and descended to the ground where Yu Sheng was. Her divine light flashed brilliantly as it fell from the sky. At that moment, 9-colored light covered Yu Sheng, and her beautiful figure became even more so until it was almost suffocating. Unfortunately, Yu Sheng did not know how to appreciate it, and he looked indifferent. Everyone who was watching looked on in wonder. This princess of the demon peacock emperor's realm had truly inherited the beauty of a peacock. But under this beautiful exterior was a terribly threatening aura. The 9-color light fell from the sky, and each beam of light carried with it the majesty of the great path. The light struck out towards Yu Sheng, seeking to destroy that entire space completely. Everyone trembled. The first fight would be between such strong opponents. Kong Xian of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm, and Yu Sheng were both some of the most highly ranked fighters at today's Battle of the Crimson River. At the very least, they were both in the top 10, and possibly even the top 5. And these two people had clashed as soon as the battle started. This would be a mighty contest indeed. Yu Sheng felt the pressure of the great path upon him. The 9-color light was shooting towards him faster than lightning, and carried with it the power to suppress, destroy, kill, and rend him apart. The power of the demonic path was integrated within it, giving it the ability to destroy anything. He stepped up into the air, dark golden light flowing all over him. He glittered with golden light, as he was covered in a layer of sacred armor. Yu Sheng clenched his fists and descended upon Kong Xian. As he stepped out, the divine light slammed into him, causing a horrible booming sound that shook him. It burst upon his body, forcing him to take a step backward. But his powerful body seemed able to withstand the power of the great path. His every step brought him a little closer forward. The ground shook, and the great path thundered as a terrible pressure appeared around him. It seemed like it was trying to crush everything around him on the earth and in the sky. Boom, boom, boom. The brilliant divine light seemed to be endless as it slammed against him wildly. Each strike made everyone watching tremble. It was too wild. This kind of attack still could not break his flesh. Other than Yu Sheng, there was probably no one on the battlefield who would dare to bear the attacks of Kong Xian's 9-colored light on their bare flesh. How had he tempered his body to be so strong? Did he have this dark power, this demonic aura, because he had studied the demonic arts and tempered his body with them? Kong Xian trembled inwardly as well. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes, her long hair flowing in the wind. She was confident that her attacks were at the limit of what was possible at this level. But they were not able to break Yu Sheng's flesh. Boom! He took another step. Yu Sheng was continuing forward, coming closer and closer to her. His cadence harmonized with the great path, making her feel a suffocating pressure as she stood up in the sky. Her body felt heavy. Finally, Yu Sheng took a mighty stride and crossed through the air. He would be right in front of her in a moment. Kong Xian moved as well. The 9-colored light flowed over her slender arms, and she clenched her fists. Her hands were suddenly wrapped in the 9-colored light, the flowing bright glow of the great path. Her figure flashed like a lightning bolt, crossing through the sky and descending right in front of Yu Sheng. She struck him with her fists at the same time, as the 9-colored light lashed continuously as him. She was also incredibly skilled at close combat. In a flash, countless fist shadows struck out in harmony with the 9-colored light. It was like every beam of the 9-colored light had transformed into a fist. Yu Sheng gave a great cry and thrust his fists into the air, slamming them into the great path. In a flash, there was a loud rumbling sound that pierced the sky. The air trembled as he faced Kong Xian head-on. At that moment, Yu Heng pulled back his arms, and many illusory arms appeared. Finally, a fist cut through the air and collided with Kong Xian's fists. In a flash, many fist wills overlapped, and the 9-colored light shattered violently. Kong Xian was sent flying backward. Kong Xian has been beaten back. Everyone's hearts were racing. 2 months ago, the divine and powerful demon princess had swept away everyone else on the rising dragon platform, so brilliant that she seemed peerless. But here at the Battle of the Crimson River, she had been beaten back. The Battle of the Crimson River was truly worthy of being called a battle of top figures. Yu Sheng did not stop his attacks. He did not believe in going easy on women, and so he stepped forward again. The great path resonated with his steps as the air around him was pressed down. He struck out with a fist as he continued forward, and fist will overlapped over more fist wills, extending his reach ever more. His power was without match, especially his Huangting fist will, which had his natural power and the power of the demonic arts integrated into it. Watch out! Kong Zhan stepped forward towards Kong Xian. Jialofeng flashed over at the same time, and both of them attacked Yu Sheng, the power of their blows falling on him at the same time. Yu Sheng stepped up into the air and struck out with a fist. Everything in its path was destroyed as it pierced through the sky. Kong Xian blocked it with her fists of 9-colored light, but her defenses were pierced. and she was sent flying backward yet again. There were traces of blood around her mouth, but she just wiped the blood off. She floated in the air. Her peacock feathers opened up again, looking even more beautiful than before. A bit of sovereign light flowed over them, making them incomparably bright. The great path was within her. Higher up, Kang Zhan released his powerful aura. He and Kang Xian stared at Yu Sheng. This Yu Sheng of Qinya City's combat ability was greater than they had imagined. The light from the golden rock was dazzling. Jialo Feng was getting ready to rejoin the battle. The three top cultivators of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm were about to join together to fight Yu Sheng. At the same time, battles were breaking out in other directions. In one place, the three great cultivators of Emperor Li's realm, Di Hao, Dong Chun, and Seven Sins were walking towards three people from Emperor Xiao's realm. Yi Wuchen, Huang Jioga and Qin Zhuang. Dong. A bell sounded, shaking everyone's spiritual will. The three spirits, bell, cauldron and sword, appeared behind him. A tall and mighty Vajra body appeared behind Dong Chun, with many arms. It was covered in divine light like a spell of invincibility. Sword will wrapped around Seven Sins' body, resonating sharply with each other. Many swords of Kasaipa were formed. Yi Wuchen faced Di Hao, Huang Jioga faced Dong Chun, Qin Zhuang faced Seven Sins. Swords of Kasaipa were forming around him as well. This made Seven Sins look very angry, and Li Yao, who was watching from the banks of the Crimson River, looked even more gloomy. He had personally given the sword of Kasaipa to Yi Futian. Now he had taken it back to Emperor Xiao's realm, and had apparently already taught the knowledge to many people. Qin Zhuang had learned how to form swords of Kasaipa. Yi Futian was not thinking about how Li Yao felt. He was watching the battlefield. It seemed that this truly was a continuation of the Battle of Empty Realm. In yet another battle between the realms of the three emperors, Emperor Xiao's realm was once again facing an attack from two realms. This battle was an important test for Wuchen, Jioga and Qin Zhuang. The pressure on them was great, but they could not be killed in the Battle of the Crimson River, so he was not worried. Winning or losing would test their states of mind, but he believed that Wuchen and the others, who had come up from the lower world step by step, could all withstand such a test. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Di Hao stepped towards Yi Wuchen, his god-burying bell shaking everyone to their core. Yi Wuchen felt his mind come under serious attack. His swordsman's will trembled. Di Hao stepped towards Yi Wuchen, his god-burying bell shaking everyone to their core. Yi Wuchen felt his mind come under serious attack. His swordsman's will trembled. A sword clashed and shrieked in his mind, looking bright and resplendent. But the sword shook under the toll of the bell. The god-burying bell wanted to destroy the sword and tear it completely apart. A beam of brilliant light was melded into the sword, protecting it. The terrible sword will shot out of his eyes, piercing into the eyes of Di Hao, who was still walking towards him. Yi Wuchen's sword spirit was a spirit elemental. The sword had tempered his willpower. It was firm and unshakable, and his swordsman's will was extremely stable. The swordsman's state of mind was unblemished. His will could not be destroyed, but even so, the god-burying bell was still difficult to bear. But he still took a step forward single-minded, his sword will moving with him. The world between him and Di Hao turned into a world of illusory swords. There were swords everywhere. Di Hao swept his gaze over the illusory swords, looking indifferent. The bell still rang, and he knew what was an illusion and what was real. At the same time as that, the precious cauldrons flew over. They were engraved with a pattern like a mighty dragon that had been to be extraordinary. Endless precious cauldrons descended, slamming towards Yi Wuchen, trying to break everything around him. Seventh swordsman was not there, and so Di Hao was the foremost person in the Dali dynasty below the saint level. His power was clear for all to see, and his knowledge of the great path seemed infinitesimally close to that of a saint. He traversed a great distance with a single step. Yi Wuchen felt like he was under thousands of pounds of pressure, but he still held his back up straight, like the edge of a sword. He formed a sword mudra in front of him, and instantly, Thousands of swords were floating in the air and whirling around his body, pointing up into the air. The endless swords formed a sword matrix, and they howled as they surrounded Yi Wuqian. One after another, the swords slashed through the air up into the sky, thundering towards the falling precious cauldrons. There was the sound of a shocking collision above Yi Wuqian. The precious cauldrons rotated as they fell, seeking to crush everything below them. But Yi Wuqian's swordsmanship swallowed them up, trying to destroy the power of the great path within them. An even more powerful sword will wrapped around Yi Wuqian. He was covered in swords. The thing was, when practicing swordsmanship, more swords did not necessarily make you more powerful. It was all in how powerful the swords were. I will use my sword for the path. Yi Wuqian looked very solemn. He closed his eyes and traced a seal in front of him. Divine light bloomed from him, and threads of wool went flying towards his swords and melded into them. Suddenly, Yi Wuqian's body became indistinct. It was as if he was not real. Threads of sword wool flowed from him. He seemed to become a part of all the swords. Each sword appeared in his mind. They were like his hands and feet. They were now a part of his body. When a sword bore the will of heaven and earth, it could cut through the air. Block! A sword cut through the air, slamming into a falling precious cauldron. The dragon-patterned cauldron resonated wildly, but kept falling. Block! After that, another sword came. The sound of collisions rang out incessantly, as sword after sword collided with the falling dragon-patterned cauldrons. Each time a cauldron fell into the sword-filled air below, cracks appeared in it. There was a loud noise. It was as if the air itself were splitting apart. All the precious cauldrons were shattered. They had been destroyed in an instant. Dihao stared at Yi Wuqian. At that moment, the indistinct Yi Wuqian was like a statue, standing there without moving. He seemed to have become a sword of the great path himself. He knew that, at this moment, Yi Wuqian had almost no defensive power. If he could break through his swords, it would go badly for him. Dihao stepped forward through the air, towards the space above Yi Wuqian's head. His precious cauldron life spirit howled as it descended upon Yi Wuqian's head. It constantly grew bigger as it fell, until it became a divine cauldron that blocked out the sun. The power of the great path was within it. The radiance of the great path descended from above the cauldron, powerful enough to destroy anything. Countless illusory precious cauldrons fell behind it. The whole area became a death trap. The swords rattled. It seemed that they were being crushed and could not move. But the clattering swords continued to rotate, breaking up and counterbalancing the will of the precious cauldrons, and tearing through the air. They rose and shattered the illusions of precious cauldrons, and shot towards Dihao's precious cauldron life spirit. But just as they reached it, the precious cauldron just shook and sped up to suppress it. Yi Wuqian drew another seal in the air, and thousands of sword wills rose, slamming wildly into the dragon-patterned cauldron, slowing its descent. The two forces clashed wildly. Up in the sky, Dihao's sword spirit clattered and shrieked. The matter around him coalesced into swords of Kasaipa. The swords of Kasaipa that had just formed shot towards Yi Wuqian, aiming for the finger he was using to draw seals. The swords shot through the air, seeming to ignore the vast distance between them. Yi Wuqian seemed to sense this, and his swords suddenly lined up in front of him, protecting his flesh. They shot out in all directions, colliding with the swords of Kasaipa that were flying towards him. The swords cracked and shattered each other. Dihao stepped forward, and the ringing of his bell shook the sky. Swords of Kasaipa continued to form and shoot, being created as quickly as they were destroyed. How many swords do you have? Dihao's voice melded with the ringing of the bell of the great path, thundering downward. Under the assault of three different powers, Yi Wuqian was subject to an immense amount of pressure. A line of scarlet blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. But he made no sound. He still stood there with his eyes closed. Not many people at the edge of the Crimson River were watching Yi Wuqian's battle. Most of them were watching others, such as Yu Sheng fighting off the three great cultivators of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm by himself. Their collisions shook the air. Every attack contained unimaginable power. It was truly astonishing. But Yi Futian was paying more attention to Yi Wuqian's battle. This was not the battle of the sleeping dragon. Yu Sheng, There would be no use in Yu Sheng helping Yi Wuchen and the others. They had insisted on taking part in this battle. They had wanted to experience this kind of fighting. If Yu Sheng came and helped them, what good would it do them? Di Hao's 3 life spirits had all appeared. He was so close to the Great Path, and was using his full power to attack. Wuchen would improve a lot from this, even though he was under so much pressure. And it was not only Yi Wuchen. At that moment, Huang Jiuge was being crushed by Dong Chen. Dong Chen's Vajra body was tall and mighty, like a divine Vajra. Its many arms were striking out with many palm prints, crushing everything in their path. Huang Jiuge's life spirit bloomed. His Renhuang body was tall and imperial, but unfortunately, it only had the form of a Renhuang, not the power. But even so, it held a sword pointed at the sky, cutting through the oncoming palm prints. This lasted until the powerful pressure from the palm prints reached him, and it crushed him to the ground, making it difficult to move. His arms trembled slightly. Dong Chen did not give him a chance to fight back. After he had crushed him, thousands of illusions shrieked forward and descended upon Huang Jiuge. Many shadows overlapped into one. He struck down with one finger towards Huang Jiuge's face. Dong Chen's most powerful attack was God Destroyer. This descending finger contained the attack power of the Great Path, and could destroy men, gods, and ghosts. Huang Jiuge stared up at Dong Chen, and gave a great cry. Renhuang light flowed from him, and an incomparably overbearing power swept out, slamming into Dong Chen. But it did not stop his finger. The finger descended, and a terrible strangling force rushed towards Huang Jiuge. It raged in his mind, destroying everything. At that moment, blood was running down Huang Jiuge's brow. His eyes were closed, and his Renhuang will was protecting his spiritual will. But Dong Chen's finger continued to assault his spiritual willpower. "You still won't admit defeat?" called Dong Chen. The voice shook Huang Jiuge's mind. In Huang Jiuge's mind, his spiritual will was constantly bursting and evaporating. Lines of brilliant divine light were flowing, taking him back many years. At the Battle of the Imperial Mausoleum, his father had died protecting the tomb. He had traded his life to allow Huang Jiuge to enter the tomb and inherit the power of his ancestors. He had inherited the power of the Great Path, and his ancestors had used Renhuang will to cleanse his spiritual willpower and grant the power to him. So why had he still not reached enlightenment? He had dishonored his father's death and his ancestors. Blood kept running down his brow, but the light still shone brilliantly. Huang Jiuge had not given up. Yi Futian was uneasy as he beheld this scene. He had nothing to say. After the battle at the Imperial Mausoleum, Huang Jiuge's personality had changed. He was no longer as bold and generous as before, but had become more restrained and silent. In that battle, Huang Shi had traded his life so that his son could inherit the will of their ancestors. Huang Jiuge was presumably carrying a heavy burden. In this way, Wuchen was much more free than Jiuge. His sword was simple and unblemished. He hoped that Huang Jiuge could break through one day. Images flashed in Huang Jiuge's mind. He seemed to be able to see the scene of him inheriting his ancestors' power. His ancestors had had the power of Renhuang. Their chariots had thundered across the world, and everyone bowed to them. Wherever they pointed their sword, the heavens paled. With longsword and longbow, they had raged against destiny and the power of the gods. How magnificent it had been. But now, even though he had inherited his ancestors' power, he was being crushed, and he had still not reached enlightenment. The world was in turmoil, and the Renhuang will within him was vast. It spread throughout heaven and earth, and a suffocating force filled the area. It seemed that Renhuang had truly arrived. Huang Jiuge squeezed his eyes shut even tighter. He seemed to have forgotten that he was under attack. All that he could see was that magnificent scene. He forgot about rule power. He forgot about the Great Path. He just used all his might to try and feel the images before him. Before his father had died, he had used the power of his ancestor Renhuang to step upon the Great Path. Had he seen the magnificent things Huang Jiuge was now seeing? Dong Chen frowned. He suddenly felt immense pressure. It was everywhere, like the power of Renhuang was there. It seemed that this area could not contain any other paths. Huang Jiuge's Renhuang body seemed to become larger and mightier. A burst of power came from within him, making Dong Chen's Vajra body come under enormous pressure. At that moment, Huang Zhouge opened his eyes. They seemed to have changed, becoming more imperious. As he looked at him, Dong Chen felt only that he should bow and submit. Whoosh! A wild aura swept out. Terrifying illusions appeared, a battle matrix that crushed heaven and earth, surging forth and slamming violently into Dong Chen. He felt his will was being dominated. This was the path of Ren Huang. Dong Chen could naturally see the blood of Ren Huang flowing upon the body of the one he was fighting, even though he had never attained enlightenment. But now, he could feel the power of the path of Ren Huang. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.